Greetings and salutations, all of my fellow American sovereigns. This is the Vocational Science of Freedom Saturday Night Civics and Sovereignty class. Tonight we are going to have our second reading of a book entitled Conspirators'Hierarchy by Dr. JohnColman. And we did our first reading a little while back. And at the end of that first reading, Breaking Spectre gave us a suggestion as to the Zero Hedge article, which we just got done with, which was The Modern Slave, which was in 3 parts. I've now put that reading into a playlist on all of the platforms. And it was a good segue because it was definitely on point as to what this book is all about, which is the highest global power structures. And then the Modern Slave article was very much about what these power structures are doing to everyone. So it was a good back and forth. So now we'll get back to the reading. And we left off about on page 12. Now, I technically transferred this from a PDF to a Word doc. So it says it's 233 pages, but that's really probably not correct. I am assuming that these little numbers here are actually the page numbers as to where we're at. And in the last reading, we had talked about how the Committee of 300 is structured, some of the aspects of who controls it, meaning different aspects of the IMF and the global bankers and those that are part of it. So I'm just going to start reading right where I left off just to continue. And tonight I'll probably be reading for go for about 2 hours, at least until my voice starts to give out. So just get back to where we left off at, okay? Since there already are scores of books on the Council of Foreign Relations and the Trilaterals, we shall go directly to the Club of Rome and the German Marshall Fund. When I introduced these organizations to the United States, few, if any, had heard of them. My first work, The Club of Rome, published in 1983, attracted almost no attention. Many uninitiated people thought the Club of Rome was something to do with the Catholic Church, and that the German Marshall Fund referred to the Marshall Plan. This is precisely why the committee chose these names, to confuse and to deflect attention away from what was happening. Not that the United States government didn't know, but it was a part of the conspiracy. It helped to keep the lid on information rather than let the truth be known. A few years later, after I published my work, a few writers saw in it a wealth of hitherto untapped information and began writing and talking about it as though they had always had full knowledge of it. It came as a revelation to them that the Club of Rome and its financiers, under the title of the German Marshall Fund, were 2 highly organized conspiratorial bodies operating under cover of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, that's NATO, and that the majority of Club of Rome executives were drawn from NATO. The Club of Rome formulated all of what NATO claimed as its policies, and through the activities of the Committee of 300 member Lord Carrington, it was able to split NATO into 2 factions, a political left-wing power group and its former military alliance. The Club of Rome is still one of the most important foreign policy arms in the Committee of 300, the other being the Bilderbergers. Now, most of you probably know who the Bilderbergers are, and where they meet is usually something that many people talk about when it happens. They do tend to bounce around a little bit here and there. And then, of course, the other group that gets together once a year is the Bohemian Grove Bastards out in California. Also a name that most people would probably recognize. So to continue. It was put together in 1968 from hardcore members of the original Morgenthau group on the basis of a telephone call made by the late Aurelio Pesci for a new and urgent drive to speed up the plans of the New World Government, now called the New World Order, although I prefer the former name. It is certainly a better job description than the New World Order, which is somewhat confusing, as there have been several quote-unquote New World Orders before, but no one world government. Pessy's call was answered by the most subversive, quote, future planners, close quote, drawn from the United States, France, Sweden, Britain, Switzerland, and Japan that could be mustered. During the period of 1968 to 1972, the Club of Rome became a cohesive entity of new scientists, globalists, future planners, and internationalists of every stripe. As one delegate put it, we became Joseph's coat of many colors. Pessy's book, Human Quality, formed the basis of the doctrine adopted by NATO's political wing. Remember, that's a left-wing organization. So NATO's left-wing tendencies is an amalgamation of global communism. And it always makes me laugh because for decades, everybody, for the most part, thought of the worst threat of communism from Russia. And now Putin is literally the biggest opponent of what NATO's doing. Kind of makes sense because of what his country went through and the horrific suffering that the Russian people have had to endure from the start of Bolshevism through the 66 million Christians that have been slaughtered in that country till now. And obviously, Putin knows all of that history because Alexander Solzhenitsyn was one of Putin's mentors. And we all know how good old Alexander taught us about what happened during those very, very dark times in the Gulag archipelago. But to continue, the following is extracted from Dr. Pessy's book, Human Quality. Quote, for the first time since the first millennium was approached in Christendom, large masses of people are really in suspense about the impending advent of something unknown, which could change their collective fate entirely. Man does not know how to be truly modern man. Man invented the story of the bad dragon. But if there ever was a bad dragon, it is man himself. See where this is going? Man is the enemy to them. Okay? It's hard to even describe how twisted and ridiculous this is. And the evil that it causes because of this mindset. So you always want to remember that in your enemy's eye, man himself is the enemy. Okay? It's very important to understand that. And that you can't reason with these people because many of them are biological psychopaths, okay? So just know that this is a war on mankind, and they are the ones that are perpetuating it. All right, to continue. Here we have the human paradox. Man trapped by his extraordinary capacity and achievements as in a quicksand. The more he uses his power, the more he needs it. We must never tire of repeating how foolish it is to equate the present profound pathological state and maladjustment of the entire human society to any cyclical crisis or passing circumstances. Since man has opened Pandora's box of new technologies, he has suffered uncontrolled human proliferation. The mania for growth, energy crisis, actual or potential resource scarcities, degradation of environment, nuclear folly, and a host of related afflictions. Well, okay, let's take a look at that list for a second. Isn't most of that list being perpetuated by these people? Meaning they take the technology that those that have the capacity to be connected to, for lack of a better word, the universal muse, and can invent things that yesterday did not exist. These psychopaths take that technology and they pervert, they profane, they reverse and make evil what could be used for good. I was listening to Daniel the other day to his Ballbusters show, and he made a really good point about this very point, that your enemy always twists everything to the opposite of the goodness that it could be or should be, whether it be language in the aspects of law, which is what we focus on more here, or whether it be religions, or whether it be the understanding of the human psyche, whether it be, as was just stated, technologies, doesn't matter. They always profane everything. They always twist everything in the opposite direction. So when he's talking about man is doing all this, that is bullshit. They are doing all this, and they are turning around and they are blaming mankind as the enemy, right? Because what does the real enemy do? They stab you in the back, and then when you say ouch, they say, I didn't do it. That wasn't me. You did it to yourself. Or whatever other level of stupidity and argument that they try and give to you. Oh, it's you did it to yourself, right? You're the ones that did it to yourself. You're the ones that created this problem because you were too stupid to do X, Y, Z. Or, and a lot of the times, when they're doing something to us, before they do it, they will give you notice of it. And then when you don't take notice, and the notice can come in all kinds of different shapes and forms. It can come in the form of movies. It can come in the form of books that they write. It can come in the form of, and a lot of times does, comes in the form of policy, meaning public policy as to how they're going to administer the abandoned infant estates. They give you notice. And then when you fail to act on the notice that they give you, it's that revelation of method thing. When you fail to alter your course, they say, oh, it's your fault. You did it to yourself. And then the next thing that comes, usually, is what's called the ritualistic mocking of the victim. Also, a lot of the times in the form of movies, but also it comes in a lot of different other forms. The Georgia Guidestones was a good example of that until somebody blew it the fuck up, which was a brilliant thing. But that was definitely a ritualistic mocking of the victim. They were saying, ha, 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 this is what we're going to do to you, right? And giving notice at the same time, but laughing at you. So this is what these people do. They get off on laughing at the world, mankind, when mankind doesn't stop them from doing what they're doing, okay? So, to continue. Yeah, implied consent, exactly, Spectre. All right, so this is identical to the program adopted by the much later fake environmentalists movement, spawned by the same Club of Rome to blunt and turn back industrial development. Broadly, the anticipated counter-program of the Cult of Rome would cover inventing and disseminating, quote, post-industrialization ideas in the United States, coupled with the spread of counterculture movements such as drugs, rock, sex, hedonism, Satanism, witchcraft, environmentalism, LGBTQ, Black Lives Matter, Antifa, and pick the rest of your poisons. All right. Tavistock Institute, Stanford Research Institute, and the Institute for Social Relations, in fact, the entire wide spectrum of research organizations in the applied social psychiatry, either had delegates on the board of the Club of Rome or acted as advisors and played a guiding role in NATO's attempt to adopt the quote-unquote Aquarian conspiracy. The same New World Order, as seen as something developed as a consequence of the Gulf War in 1991, whereas the one world government is recognized as being centuries old. The New World Order is not new. It has been around and developing under one or another guise for a very long time, but it is perceived as a development of the future, which is not the case. The New World Order is past and present, which is exactly why I named the VSOF timeline doc in the way that I did. Lies and thievery of 4,000 years, the old world history anew. Because that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with very old organizations but in a new way. New names. They've changed the way they're doing things. They're continuing to go about doing what they're doing, but it's the same damn group of people, just different names and different techniques. Because as the technology gets better, they adapt the technology to serve their purposes to continue the slave system in a more and more efficient way that you're not paying attention to. Okay. So to continue. That's why I said earlier that the term one world government is or ought to be preferred. Aurelio Pesci once confided in his close friend Alexander Haig, probably Hogg, that he felt like Adam Weishaupt reincarnated. Oh, isn't that a disgusting thought? If anybody doesn't know who Adam Weishaupt is, he was the one who was commissioned by the Rothschilds to establish the Illuminati. And then the Illuminati's main goal was to infiltrate every single secret society on the entire planet and make sure that all of their goals were eventually folded into Illuminati goals. That was what Weishaupt's charge basically was from the Rothschilds. So, okay. And then Pesci had much of Weishaupt's brilliant ability to organize and control the Illuminati of today. And it showed through in Pesci's control of NATO and formulating its policies on a global scale. Pesci headed the Atlantic Institute Economic Council for 3 decades while he was the chief executive officer for Giovanni Agnelli's Fiat Motor Company. Agnelli, a member of the ancient Italian black nobility family of the same name, is one of the most important members of the Committee of 300. Right. Okay. So here you go. You get these connections back to the old world. The Venetian black nobility, or they're calling it the Italian black nobility, but it really goes back to Venice. And I don't want to get too deep into this history because I don't want to get too far sidetracked, but I just want to connect one thing here regarding the Venetian black nobility. When Unum Sanctum was laid down, which was the first testamentary trust established by a papal bull by the cult of Rome, meaning, whatever, the Catholic Church, but I prefer to call it just the cult of Rome. What they did was the Pope said, okay, I'm going to put the entire world into a trust. Okay, like, first off, how do you have the authority to do that? Of course you don't, but anyway. And the Christians of the world will be the beneficiaries of it. The executor will be the Pope, meaning not the man, but the corporation's soul, which is the papacy, the one that has the triple crown. And the trustees of this whole entire trust would be the Venetian black nobility, basically the Venetian banking families. Okay. So they've been a part of the illegality and theft and insanity of all this right from the get-go. Okay. So just to connect that in a little bit. All right, to continue. The Italian black nobility family of the same is one of the most important members of the Committee of 300. He played a leading role in development projects of the Soviet Union. The Club of Rome is a conspiratorial umbrella organization, a marriage between Anglo-American financiers and the old black nobility families of Europe, particularly the so-called nobility. I love how he puts it in quotes because the current quote-unquote nobility of England right now isn't legitimate. It should be in a different bloodline at the moment. So, and not to get too far down this rabbit hole either, but the current king, whatever, of England, his connection, his bloodline actually goes back to the kings of Seville in Spain. So he actually has, strangely enough, Muslim bloodline. And everybody's saying, well, how come, England's letting all these Muslims? Well, you might want to go ask the king. Okay. Because that's where his bloodline goes to. So, yeah. To continue. All right. The key to the successful control of the world is their ability to create and manage savage economic recessions and eventual depressions. The Committee of 300 looks to social convulsions on a global scale, followed by depressions, as a softening up technique for bigger things to come, as its principal method of creating masses of people all over the world who will become its quote-unquote welfare recipients of the future. Right? They will take the welfare and they will be without their redemption, as Edward Mandelhouse said. The committee appears to base much of its important decisions affecting mankind on the philosophy of Polish aristocrat Felix Derinsky, who regarded mankind as being slightly above the level of cattle. Right, as do all the dark Luciferian Jews. They see everyone who's not one of them as being animals, and that all of them should be killed, and that even the best of the goy should be killed. Right? You get into the Talmudic aspect of that filth. So anyway, to continue. As a close friend of British intelligence agent Sidney Riley, Riley was actually Derensky's controller during the Bolshevik Revolution's formative years. Oh, that's interesting. So a British intelligence agent was a controller of one of the main people in the Bolshevik Revolution's formative years. Okay. Well, that would make sense because it's a Rothschild-controlled intelligence agency on the British side going to destroy Russia. So actually, that makes perfect sense. He often confided in Riley during his drinking bouts. Derensky was, of course, the beast who ran the Red Terror apparatus. He once told Riley, where the two were on a drinking binge, that, quote, "Man is of no importance. Look at what happens when you starve him. He begins to eat his dead companions to stay alive. Man is only interested in his own survival. That is all that counts. All that Spinoza stuff is a lot of rubbish." And just to bring up a little wiki on this filthy son of a bitch. So this is wiki page. I'm not going to go through the totality of it, but I felt it was necessary to bring it up. So Felix Derinsky, nicknamed Iron Felix, was a Soviet revolutionary and politician of Polish origin from 1917 till his death in 1926. He led the first three Soviet secret police organizations, the Cheka, the GPU, and OGPU, establishing state security organs for the Bolshevik government. So, you want to talk about 66 million Christians being eradicated? This guy was definitely at the top of that situation. And I'm just going to flip through here and see if there's anything else of interest. Political affiliations. I know that it talks about him working with Lenin. Oh, yeah, so I kind of highlighted it down here. Okay, so Lenin regarded Derinsky as a revolutionary hero and appointed him to organize a force to combat internal threats, which basically means anything against their power. On 20th December 1917, the Council of People's Commissars officially established the All-Russian Extraordinary Commission to combat counter-revolution and sabotage, commonly known as the Cheka, based on Russian acronym B, whatever letter that is, K. Derinsky became its director, and the Cheka received extensive resources and became known for ruthlessly pursuing any perceived counter-revolutionary elements. As the Russian Civil War expanded, Derinsky also began organizing internal security groups to enforce the Cheka's authority. So, as we know of the Bolsheviks, I think it was 95. It was at least 90%. I think it was a little bit higher than 90% of all of the Bolsheviks were Luciferian Jews. This is a known thing. And that they sought their revenge to take out the Tsar of Russia because of old beefs going all the way back to Khazaria and what the Tsar and his family said to the Khazarian king, which was basically, stop your human sacrifice, stop robbing our people, and if you don't, we'll come down there and we'll wipe you out. So that was the Luciferians' final solution to taking care of Russia. And they did it through this son of a bitch and Lenin and the rest of the Bolsheviks. So, okay. So to continue, the Club of Rome has its own private intelligence agency and also borrows from David Rockefeller's Interpol. Yes, Rockefellers do set up and run Interpol. Every U.S. intelligence agency cooperates very closely with it, as does the KGB and the Mossad. The only agency that remained beyond its reach was the East German Intelligence Service, the Stasi. The Club of Rome also had its own highly organized political and economic agencies. It was they who told President Reagan to retain the services of Paul Volcker. Some of you may or may not remember him. Yet another important committee of 300 member. Volcker stayed on as Federal Board Chairman, notwithstanding the faithful promise of candidate Reagan that he would dismiss him as soon as he, Reagan, was elected. The Club of Rome, after playing a key role in the Cuban Missile Crisis, attempted to sell its quote-unquote crisis management, the forerunner of FEMA program, to President Kennedy. Several Tavistock scientists went to see the president to explain what it meant, but the president rejected the advice they gave. Probably just one more reason why they took Kennedy out. The same year that Kennedy was murdered, Tavistock was back in Washington to talk with NASA. This time, the talks were successful. Tavistock was given a contract by NASA to evaluate the effort of its coming space program on American public opinion. The contract was farmed to the Stanford Research Institute and the RAND Corporation. Much of the material produced by Tavistock, Stanford, and RAND never saw the light of day and remains sealed until now. Several Senate oversight committees and subcommittees I approached to obtain information told me that they had, quote-unquote, never heard of it, nor did they have the slightest idea where I might find what I was seeking. Such is the power and prestige of the Committee of 300. Also, I would go to say, such is the stupidity and the useful idiot status of Congress. So, yeah. In 1966, I was advised by my intelligence colleagues to approach Dr. Atal Rappaport, who had written a treatise in which the administration was said to be interested. It was a paper intended to bring the end to NASA's space program, which Rappaport said had outlived its usefulness. Rappaport was quite happy to give me a copy of his paper, which, without going into fine detail, basically claimed that NASA's space program should be scrapped. NASA has too many scientists who were exerting a bad influence on America because they were eager to lecture schools and university audiences on how rocketry worked, from construction to propulsion. Rappaport claimed that this would produce a generation of adults who would decide to become space scientists only to find themselves redundant, as no one would need their services by the year 2000. Well, okay, this whole thing about let's scrap all of NASA and let's not teach anybody higher learning and let's not make rocket scientists. This is the aspect of the modus operandi of making sure that mankind never rises above their ability to push us down, whether it be reaching for the stars, whether it be invention in general, whether it be high-level intellect and the capacity within society to produce it. These are all things that they do not want. They want it for themselves, but only for the small group of people that then have and control that power. They don't want anybody else to possibly understand how to do any of this. You know, keep the boot on the neck of the slaves, keep them dumb, keep giving them their benefits, and when they're no longer useful, just take away their benefits and they'll all die. That way you can control the herd however you wish to, and they will never have self-reliance. Right? All right, to continue. No sooner than had Rappaport's prolific report on NASA been presented to NATO by the Club of Rome that the Committee of 300 demanded action. NATO Club of Rome officials charged with urgent anti-NASA action, where Harlan Cleveland, Joseph Slater, Claiborne K. Pell, Walter J. Livy, George McKee, William Watts, Robert Strauss Hoop, U.S. Ambassador to NATO, and Donald Lesh. In May 1967, a meeting was organized by the Scientific and Technological Committee of the North Atlantic Assembly and the Foreign Policy Research Institute. It was called, quote, Conference on Transatlantic Imbalance and Collaboration, close quote. It was held at Queen Elizabeth's palatal property in Duval, France. Right, because the Queen and now the King are right up top in the Committee of 300. The basic purpose and intent of the conference at Duval was to end U.S. technological and industrial progress. Let me read that again. The basic purpose and intent of the conference at Deauville was to end U.S. technological and industrial progress. meaning we as Americans will no longer be in the forefront of invention, manufacturing, particularly high-level chips, which is why they're all produced in Taiwan at the moment, not here, even though they started off being produced here, to whittle down and destroy our infrastructure, to swamp us with third world scum and criminals and retards, and to make sure that all these visas keep going on so that none of the jobs are taken and set up and learned and expanded by Americans, but by Indians or other groups of people of which they can easily control, because they say, oh, if you don't come over here and do what we tell you to do, we'll pull your visa. Right? You have direct control over people who you flood into another country and you control their visas. They'll do whatever you tell them to do because they don't want to be in their third world shitholes anymore. Makes perfect sense. Trouble is, it's a military invasion. Trouble is that anybody at the moment who does swear an oath to uphold and protect the Constitution of the United States of America is committing treason by allowing this horde to invade us. That is a problem. And that is where we should form 25-member grand juries of the peerage and indict them and execute them for treason. Because treason has 2 punishments under the Constitution. It's the only thing that was ever defined in the Constitution was treason. And the punishments were also stated as well. It's either life imprisonment or death by hanging. I wonder why the founding fathers decided to put that definition into the Constitution. Perhaps because they knew that someday something like this might come to pass? Just a thought. To continue. Out of the conference came 2 books, one of which is mentioned herein. Brzezinski's Technotronic Era. The other was written by conference chairman Aurelio Pesci, entitled The Chasm Ahead. Pesci largely agreed with Brzezinski, but added that there would be chaos in a future world not ruled by a one world Luciferian occult Jew order. Yes, I added that myself. One world government is the Luciferians controlling everything, okay? The Lucius Trust, which literally stands for the Lucifer Trust, has stated, because many of those members are of the Committee of 300 are also part of the Lucius Trust, they've stated clearly and flat out that no one who does not pledge allegiance to Lucifer will be part of the New World Order, meaning the one world government, as is stated in here. So, again, this is your enemy. They're telling you who they are. They're not mincing words about it. And they're telling you flat out that we have the right to kill you at any time that we feel like. And you will bow down to us. There will be no more nations. And all of these committees, all of these think tanks, all of these ways of control, all need to be exterminated. All of them. And anything that you can do on a daily basis to remove any influence that any of them may have over you or your property or your family's property or your community's property should be done. No matter what it is. Even a little bit of the sand put into the gears is a good thing. If you can remove an entire cog out of the system, like literally removing pieces out of the engine, do it. But if all you can do is throw sand in by just making sure that they don't get your energy, then make sure that you start with that. Because if everybody started with that, there'd be so much sand in the engine that the whole thing would just come crashing down. So anyway, to continue. In this regard, Pesci insisted that the Soviet Union must be offered, quote, a convergence with NATO. Such a convergence ending in an equal partnership in a new world order with the United States. Both nations would be responsible for future, quote-unquote, crisis management and global planning. The first Club of Rome's global planning contract went to the Massachusetts Institute for Technology, MIT, one of the premier Committee of 300's research institutes. J. Forrester and Dennis Meadows were placed in charge of the project. What was their report all about? It did not differ fundamentally from what Mathis and von Hayek preached, namely the old question of not enough natural resources to go around, which, of course, we know is absolute BS. There's plenty of natural resources to go around, and the monopolization of them is the problem. It's not they're not there. It's that these filthy Luciferian occultists are the ones that are hoarding all of them. So when they talk about, again, I'm going to stab you in the back, but it's your fault, right? This is, again, what they're talking about when it comes to resources. Oh, you dirty little humans, you just take all these resources from us. So we're going to take them from you and make monopolies so that you can't have them. So there's your knife in the back. But when you go screaming about it, again, it's your fault, right? So the Forrester Meadows report was a complete fraud. What it did not say was that man's proven inventive genius would, in all likelihood, work its way around, quote unquote, shortages. Exactly. Fusion energy, the deadly enemy of the Committee of 300, would be applied to creating natural resources. A fusion torch could produce from 1 square mile of ordinary rock enough aluminum, for example, to fill our needs for 4 years. So this is literally getting into the aspect of what the ancients called alchemy. And by the way, all of the heavier elements, let me put it this way. Every element heavier than iron 34, okay? And 34 being the atomic weight of that particular isotope of iron. Every single element heavier than that comes from one single place in the universe. Always has, always will. And that single place is an exploding star called a supernova. Because only when a star goes supernova is there enough energy around to actually fuse all of the heavier things that are floating around on our planet. Again, everything heavier than iron 34. Everything up to iron 34 is created inside the star during the fusion process of the star's life, right? And then it gets up to iron 34, but once it does that, it only can possibly do that for a very short period of time. And then what happens is that literally the core collapses, and one of many things happens. I don't want to get into the whole totality of astrophysics at the moment, but everything else is created from a supernova, but everything up to that point is created within a star. So when you get to the point of being able to actually create fusion, meaning literally a man-made star, you can create all of these elements up to the weight of iron 34, but not above it. Okay. So just as an aspect of a cosmic lesson in what you are and what the universe is, there you go. And remember that from the standpoint of a self-awareness aspect of yourself, right? As Carl Sagan said, you are literally stardust collecting starlight. So, to continue. A fusion torch could produce... Okay, I've read that. All right. Pesce never tired of preaching against the nation state and how destructive they are for the progress of mankind. He called for collective responsibility. Nationalism was a cancer on man, was the theme of several important speeches delivered by Pesce. Right. Nationalism was a cancer on man. Right. Let's not have, I don't know, peoples and nations actually determining their own direction that they want to proceed in. No. We can't have that. His close friend, Irvin Lazo, produced a work in 1977 in a similar vein, which was called Goals of Mankind, a landmark study for the Club of Rome. The entire position paper was a vitriolic attack on industrial expansion and urban growth. Right. Same idea about destroying all industry. Throughout these years, Kissinger, as the designated contact man, kept in close touch with Moscow on behalf of the RIIA. I don't know what that is. Did he mention what that was before? I don't know what that is. Anyway, if anybody wants to look that up and throw it in chat. All right. Global modeling papers were regularly shared with Kissinger's friends in the Kremlin. What's that make? Okay, great. So Kissinger was just sharing stuff over there with everybody. With regard to the Third World, the Club of Rome's Harlan Cleveland prepared a report which was the height of cynicism. At the time, Cleveland was United States ambassador to NATO. Really? Essentially, the paper said it would be up to third world nations to decide among themselves which populations should be eliminated. Which one of you wants to jump off the cliff first? We'll let you decide. Right. As Pesce later wrote, based on the Cleveland Report, damaged by conflicting policies of three major countries and blocs, roughly patched up here and there, the existing international economic order is visibly coming apart at the seams. The prospect of the necessity of the resource to triage deciding who must be saved is a very grim one indeed. But if such events should ever come to pass, the right to make such decisions cannot be left to just a few nations, because it would lead themselves to ominous power over life of the world's hungry. So again, this is them pitting man against man, because mankind is the enemy, again, right? This is found in the committee policy of deliberately starving African nations to death, as evidenced in the sub-Saharan nations. This was cynicism at its worst, because Committee of 300 had already abrogated the decisions of life and death unto itself, and Pesce knew it. He had previously so indicated in his book, Limits of Growth. Oh, he wrote that book. Okay. That book, Limits of Growth, you'll find a lot of global evil wrapped up in that book. So, okay, that makes perfect sense that he wrote that. Okay. Pesce completely dismissed industrial and agricultural progress, and in its place demanded that the world come under one coordinating council, to wit, the Club of Rome and its NATO institutions, in a one world government. Natural resources would have to be allocated under the auspice of global planning. Right, that's your Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030, right? That's your auspices of global planning right there. Because this stuff is not just happening in America. These smart cities are going up, everywhere around the globe that they can possibly get away with it. So anyway, nation states can either accept Club of Rome domination or else survive by the law of the jungle and fight to survive. Well, that would be great for America. I would actually prefer that. Cut off the whole entire planet, just us. We do our own thing. We get rid of all of these invaders. We don't let anybody else in. We fix our demographics. We industrialize. We invent. And we go on to a higher level of civilization. All by first and foremost getting rid of any control of Roman civil law over any of us. Getting rid of the United States Federal Corporation. Getting rid of all of the remnants of that and everything that stems from it. Going all the way back to reversing all of the fuckery that happened during Reconstruction after the Civil War till now. If we do all that, or I should say, when we do all that, we will go back to being the most powerful, most advanced, happiest nation in the world, without question. So, as far as I'm concerned, your proposal is accepted, right? I got no problem with that. As long as we do those things in America, I would be happy to survive by the quote unquote law of the jungle, because I know we would destroy everybody. Destroy not in the point of that we would go out to specifically destroy nations. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we would become first in education again. We would become first in healthcare again. We would become first in longevity again. And the only reason none of that's happening, and the only reason any of that went backwards, is because these Luciferian bastards are the ones that are messing it all up. So you get rid of them by any means necessary, because they consider this to be a war against all of us, literally a war against mankind itself. So once I'm in a war, and once you've told me I'm in a war, guess what? There are no more rules, okay? I don't have to play by any rules. And I can guarantee you that they're not playing by any rules at all. So, time comes when, hey, maybe it's time to make a decision. Maybe it's time to realize that you're in a fifth generational war. Maybe it's time to realize that you need to prepare for a fight that's still coming and learn how to at least fight the fight that's already upon you. Because you are in a lot of battlefields at the moment, whether you realize it or not. So anyway, I digress. Back to the article. In its first quote-unquote test case, Meadows and Forrester planned the 1973 Arab-Israeli War on behalf of the RIIA to sharply bring home to the world that natural resources like petroleum would, in the future, come under global planners' control, meaning, of course, under the control of the Committee of 300. Tavistock Institute called for a consultation with Pesce, to which McGeorge Bundy, Homer Perlmutter, and Dr. Alexander King were invited. From London, Pesce traveled to the White House, where he met with the president and his cabinet, followed by a visit to the State Department, where he conferred with the Secretary of State, the State Department's Intelligence Service, and State's Policy Planning Council. Thus, from the very beginning, the United States government was fully aware of the Committee of 300's plans for this country. That should answer the often asked question, quote, why would our government allow the Club of Rome to operate in a subversive manner in the United States? Well, only the stupid sheep would ever ask that question. So Volcker's economic and monetary policies were a reflection of those of Sir Geoffrey Howe, Chancellor of the Exchequer and member of the Committee of 300. Oh, see, there you go. You get the Chancellor of the Exchequer chiming in as well. This serves to illustrate how Britain has controlled the United States, beginning from soon after the War of 1812, and continues to exercise control over this country through the policies of the Committee of 300. Well, that's good. At least somebody realizes this point, right? That this is where the debt and the thing started way back then, that because we didn't continue to enforce the original 13th Amendment, that he's right. This is how Britain controlled the United States beginning soon after the War of 1812. This literally is where it started from. And then they messed everything up and then started the Civil War. So anyway, to continue, what are the goals of the secret elite group, the inheritors of Illuminism, Moria conquering wind? Don't know what that's referring to. The cult of Dionysus. Oh, it's just, okay, another cult. The cult of Dionysus, the cult of Isis, Catharism. Never heard of Catharism. Bogo Millerism. Also don't know what that one is either. This elite group also calls itself the Olympians. They truly believe that they are equal in power and stature to the legendary gods of Olympus, who have, like Lucifer, their god, set themselves above our true God. Absolutely believe they have been charged with implementing the following by divine right. Okay, so to put this in perspective, they are taking themselves to be not only the priest class, who were the ones that established this idea of divine right of kings, and then controlled the said king, and the priest class also being part and parcel of the attorneys, being part of that. So they're not just acting as the priest class now, they now see themselves as the priest class and the sovereignty and literally the gods from which supposedly the divine right comes from. Isn't that convenient and terrifying? Okay, so following by divine right. 1. A one world government, new world order with a unified church and monetary system under their direction. Not many people are aware that the one world government begins setting up its quote-unquote church in the 1920s, 1930s, for they realized the need for a religious belief inherent in mankind to have an outlet and therefore set up a quote-unquote church body to channel that belief in the direction they desired. 2, the utter destruction of all national identity and national pride. 3, the destruction of religion, and more especially the Christian religion, with the one exception, their own creation mentioned above, which of course is Luciferianism. 4, control in each and every person through means of mind control and what Brzezinski called technotronics, which would create humankind robots in a system of terror, beside which Felix Derinsky's Red Terror will look like children at play. Number 5, an end to all industrialization and the production of nuclear-generated electric power in what they call the post-industrial zero-growth society. Exempted are the computer and service industries. Okay, that makes perfect sense because that's where you get into the AI data centers, right? So we're not going to actually have any industrial growth as far as the capacity to improve the human condition we're only going to allow the improvement of computer and service industries to perpetuate the digital panopticon and slavery warehouse system of everybody's data, everybody's biological information, basically everything that we talked about when we read the Zero Hedge article, The Modern Slave, right? So as long as they control all of that, that's what they want. They don't want any other sort of betterment, expansion, invention to go on. So United States industries that remain will be exported to countries such as Mexico, where abundant slave labor is available. Unemployables in the wake of industrial destruction will either become opium, heroin, or cocaine addicts, or become statistics in the elimination process we know today as Global 2000. Okay, so this is so far back that back then they were calling it Global 2000. So they went from Global 2000 to Agenda 2021 to now Agenda 30, because they're not getting this done as fast as they'd like to get it done, which I find to be terrifying because it's already happening so fast. Well, it's a double-edged sword. I shouldn't say that, because the faster that they do this, the faster that they push, and the harder that they try and get things implemented, the faster everybody wakes up to it, because they look around, they're like, wait a second, what's going on? See, they don't want to wait any longer, because their potential great-great-grandfathers, established and set up this plan a very, very, very long time ago. And so all of the heirs of the idiot sons that were told throughout their entire life that you shall inherit the world, son. Well, little baby psychopath wants his candy. So what are they doing? So the baby psychopaths are just pressing all the buttons as fast as they possibly can because they want all the shit. But they're too stupid to realize that that's going to make everybody wake up and kill them. And why do they not realize this? Well, because they're psychopathic. That's the problem with psychopathy. They don't have any empathy. It's impossible. It doesn't exist. Their frontal cortex, their frontal lobe of their brain is not there, or certainly not functioning. Okay, number 6, legalization of drugs and pornography. That's obvious. 7, depopulation of large cities according to the trial run carried out by the Pol Pot regime in Cambodia. Oh, isn't that wonderful? This is interesting to note that Pol Pot's genocidal plans were drawn up here in the United States by one of the Club of Rome's research foundations. Ugh. It is also interesting that the committee is presently seeking to reinstate the Pol Pot butchers in Cambodia. Right, and they've been doing this for a while. I mean, if anybody hasn't seen it, there are videos of the people at wastewater treatment facilities, meaning city water treatment plants, that are pouring the granulated death concoction of the fluoride that they put into the water. And these guys are wearing, full on chem suits and masks and whatever when they pour this bag of shit into your water supply. So they could pour any other bag that they wanted to of whatever into that water supply anytime that they wanted to. No one would know about it until everybody was dead or dying, right? Nothing's stopping them from doing that. That's why I highly suggest that everybody have their own water supply. And I don't necessarily mean going out and buying bottled water, because you don't want to be drinking out of plastic bottles anyway. But you can collect your own water and you can put it through your own filters, or you can make damn sure that you absolutely take everything out of the water, meaning like a reverse osmosis system, and then put the minerals that you want back into it that's best for your particular health situation. Right? So you go and get your blood tested. You might be low in this. You might be low in that. You say, okay, fine. Then I'll make sure that I put that back into my water. But you do not want to be in a situation where you're just constantly drinking city water and you don't have any capacity to control that. Because, again, that's just one switch, people. They can just flip that switch anytime they want to. Poof. Whole city dead. And if you don't think they're crazy enough to do that, go back and learn history, okay? because now they can do these things very easily. Before it was, them wandering around and poisoning wells, right? We all know those stories that actually happened, right? So they now have the capacity to poison an entire well of millions of people at once. Isn't that convenient? And they've been doing it with things like fluoride. So anyway, number 8, suppression of all scientific development except for those deemed beneficial by the committee. Especially targeted is nuclear energy for peaceful purposes. Particularly hated are the fusion experiments, presently being scorned and ridiculed by the committee and its jackals of the press. Development of the fusion torch would blow the committee's conception of limited natural resources right out of the window, as I previously discussed. A fusion torch properly used could create unlimited, untapped natural resources from the most ordinary substances. Fusion torch uses are legion and would benefit mankind in a manner which is as yet not even remotely comprehended by the public. Well, I tried to make you guys comprehend it when I was describing how stars work. But anyway, so yeah. 9, caused by means of limited wars in the advanced countries and by means of starvation and diseases in the third world countries. The death of 3 billion by the year 2000. Well, and again, remember, this is quite a long ways back, but they show you what they're going to do by their revelation of method, right? Again, like the Georgia Guidestones, that there will be only 400 million people on the planet. They're going to wipe out everybody else so that man can be back in balance with nature. Well, man can be in balance with nature if we use technologies that were in balance with nature. But that's not what they want. Because remember, the enemy here is mankind itself. People they call useless eaters. Again, Ibid. The Committee of 300 commissioned Cyrus Vance to write a paper on the subject of how best to bring about such genocide. The paper was produced under the title of the Global 2000 Report and was accepted and approved for action by President Carter for and on behalf of the U.S. government, and accepted by Edwin Muskie, then Secretary of State. Under the terms of the Global 2000 Report, the population of the United States is to be reduced by 1 million by the year 2050. Well, they've obviously changed their plans quite a bit about that, and I think their current goal is more to just make sure that they wipe out the white populace of America by flooding it with foreign invaders. Because that's really what they want. They want a controllable populace. The thing that scares them the most is highly intelligent, highly organized, highly trained, highly devoted people that know they're sovereign and that are willing to die for the protection of themselves, their family, and their republic. That is literally what scares them the most. And if you pull millions and millions of invaders from other nations, they don't have the slightest idea what American common law is. They don't have the slightest idea of what the understanding of sovereignty is, nor do they deserve it, because they weren't the ones that took the sovereignty from the King of England at the Revolutionary War, right? Because that's the posterity spoken of in the preambles of both the state and federal constitutions. We the people here ordain, right? And to ourselves and our posterity. Okay. That's what took the sovereignty from the king. They all come here and they become citizens of the United States under the 14th Amendment. That's what they are. Because remember, there's 2 entirely different forms of citizenship here in America. And there has been since the passing of the 14th Amendment. Well, I shouldn't say passing. There was nothing lawful about the passing of the 14th Amendment. But if you go back and read the congressional record, I believe it was around 64, 65, something like that. Anyway, you can find arguments as recent as 65, I believe, in Congress about the illegality of the 14th Amendment and that it should be re-presented for passage or not, and that pretty much all the states would say, no, we really don't want that. But they forced it through during Reconstruction. And because of this lack of understanding that there's two entirely different citizenships in America, and that people don't realize that they have the choice to pick one or the other, or at least the ones people that are born here, meaning we the people, have a choice to make, and that we need to remove ourselves from being a citizen of the United States and make sure that we are seen and correct the public record and expatriate from this Roman creature called the District of Columbia, and make sure that we say, nope, we are a de jure state citizen and one of the people of the several states of the American Union. That's the way we can get out of this, meaning we don't have to be a part of their system. And unless and until we do that, then there's nobody populating the republic, right? As I stated in the reading of USA, the republic that no one lives in, that clearly shows what they're doing. So we have to get off our ass, declare ourselves to be what we are by law, and know that, and say, hey, I'm this, not that, and then go about taking back the republic, because we're the only ones that have the capacity and the right, and dare I say duty, to do so. Nobody else. None of these Luciferian judges, none of these cult of Rome filth, none of these Saturnalian worshipping morons are ever going to do it. All they're ever going to do is work against you to do exactly what they're talking about doing here in this book, right? So, number 10, to weaken the moral fiber of the nation and to demoralize workers in the labor class by creating mass unemployment. As jobs dwindle due to the post-industrial zero-growth policies introduced by the Club of Rome, demoralized and discouraged workers will resort to alcohol and drugs. Well, what everyone should do is resort to, I don't know, writing their own life script and not working for a corporation, but creating their own business, like everybody used to do. But to continue. The youth of the land will be encouraged by means of rock music and drugs to rebel against the status quo. These are all of the organizations that Soros obviously keeps up with, thus determining and eventually destroying the family unit. In this regard, the Committee of 300 commissioned Tavistock Institute to prepare a blueprint as to how this could be achieved. Tavistock directed Stanford Research to undertake the work under the direction of Professor Willis Harman. This work later became known as the Aquarian Conspiracy. Oh, I didn't know there was that. Okay, so there's actually a work called the Aquarian Conspiracy. Got it. Number 11, to keep people everywhere from deciding their own destinies. Right, that's, again, Ibid. That's precisely what I just said. Write your own life script. Okay? That's the only way out of this. You don't need them. None of us need what they're giving. And again, if you take a benefit from your own estate, you're abstaining from being the heir. Beneficium abstinente, people. Go look it up. So to continue. By means of one created crisis after another, and then managing such crises. Yes, that's the Hegelian dialectic. This will confuse and demoralize the population to the extent where, faced with too many choices, apathy on a massive scale will result. Again, right, this is why I try and teach all you guys what I teach here. There is a way forward. You don't have to look at all this and just be like, oh my God, it's impossible. I could never do it. No, I already made the path for you. Okay? All you have to do is have the will, the heart, and the determination to get it done. Because in a very short period of time here, they're going to try and close doors which I won't be able to reopen. And if you're not already on the other side, I doubt they'll ever let you out. So the time to correct your status and the time to make the declarations on the public record is now. Before there is no public record any longer. Before it's impossible for you to ever get out. So the time to do it is now. Not to mention, the price of silver keeps going up, people. I don't think it's going to go down anytime soon. So anybody out there waiting to get their vocational science freedom status doc set done, they're waiting for silver to come down. That might never happen. So you'd better get it done now, as fast as you possibly can, because it's the only thing that matters. Because they will see you as one of their slaves and do whatever they feel like doing to you as far as the administration of your abandoned infant estate all the way to your death, unless you do the vocational science frame status doc set and get out. So don't let this idea of apathy on a massive scale affect you. Move forward. There's a path. You just have to be willing to take it. Okay? Yeah, exactly, Spectre. Oh my God, gold's sitting at 3,700 now? Oh, I haven't checked that in a minute. Good God. And silver's at $42.95. Okay, that's up another, what, $2.50, $3 from what it was a few days ago? Yeah, so again, it's don't wait. It's not going to get any better. All right, to continue. In this case, the United States and Agency for Crisis Management is already in place, FEMA, yes, whose existence I first disclosed in 1980. There will be more on FEMA as we proceed. Number 12, to introduce new cults and continue to boost those already functioning, which include rock music, gangsters such as the filthy degenerate Mick Jagger's Rolling Stones, a gangster group much favored by European black nobility, and all of Tavistock created rock groups within, which begin with the Beatles to continue build up of the cult of Christian fundamentalism, begun by the British East India Company's servant Darby, which will be misused to strengthen the Zionist state of Israel through identifying with the Jews through the myth of God's chosen people. Right. And this is where we get the whole idea of Judeo-Christian bullshit, which is a total lie, which stems from what was the Bible? If somebody can remember the name of the specific Bible that was written that merges these, I forget it off the top of my head. It escapes me at the moment. Schofield, thank you, Spectre. Yeah. So this stems from the Schofield Bible of this idiotic notion that there's somehow a Judeo-Christian, right, religion. No, there's not. Never has been. Again, another subject that Daniel over at Ballbusters is very, very good at laying out and explaining to people. Much better than I ever could possibly do so. Okay, so, all right, back to this. All right. So Zionist state of Israel through identifying with the Jews through the myth of God's chosen people, and by donating very substantial amounts of money to what they mistakenly believe as a religious cause in the furtherance of Christianity, right, which is nothing more than the furtherance of the Luciferian state called Israel, which is at the moment committing genocide against millions of Palestinians. 14. To press for the spread of religious cults such as the Muslim Brotherhood, Muslim fundamentalism, the Sikhs. Well, I didn't really know if the Sikhs are really that bad of people, because the Sikhs, I thought, were pretty much against the Muslims, as I recall. But anyway, to carry out experiments of the Jim Jones and Son of Sam type of murders. It is worth noting that the late Ayatollah Khomeini was a creation of British Intelligence Military Intelligence Division 6, commonly known as MI6, as I reported in my 1985 work, What Really Happened in Iran. Yeah, I had always suspected that. And of course, just because one man says it doesn't make it true, but as intelligent and as well-read and as informed as this good doctor is, it probably makes sense, and I doubt that he would lie about it, so yeah. Okay, that's just a confirmation of something that had been in the back of my mind for a very long period of time. Number 15, to export religious liberation ideas around the world as to undermine the existing religions, but more especially the Christian religion. This began with Jesuit liberation theology, which brought about the downfall of the Somoza family rule in Nicaragua, and which today is destroying El Salvador, now 25 years into a civil war. Costa Rica and Honduras. Remember, guys, this is quite a ways back. We're talking about here. It's like late 1990s here. One very active entity engaged in so-called liberation theology is the communist-oriented Mary Knoll Mission. Never heard of that. This accounts for the extensive media attention to the murder of the 4 Mary Knoll so-called nuns in El Salvador a few days ago. The 4 nuns were communist subversive agents, and their activities were widely documented by the government of El Salvador. Oh, right. El Salvador says, you little communists, we're going to kill you. Oh, but we're nuns. No, you're not. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, that's another one that he hasn't mentioned, Spectre. Operation Ajax, Iranian CIA coup, 1953. That was the overthrow of Mohammad Mossadegh, who was the democratically elected president of Iran at the time. And then they ousted him. If I remember correctly, I think they killed him in exile. The details of that is a little bit fuzzy. And then anyway, that's where they implemented the Shah of Iran. So they brought back in this, they basically created a ruling family, like a dynasty or nobility, whatever, for Iran. Just created it, put it in. The Shah of Iran was installed. He created, well, not he, but the CIA then created a very deadly control mechanism called SAVAK, which was, very, very similar to CIA and MI6 and what the Bolsheviks set up from that other idiot that we spoke of earlier tonight. Every single time that the Dark Luciferians want to take over a nation, the first thing that they do is create a secret intelligence organization to make sure that everything happens the way that they want it to. That's what they've always done, right? That's who is always watching everything that's going on. And the longer that they stay in control, the more all-pervasive that all-encompassing intrusion into everyone's existence becomes. It just compounds itself, literally, as time goes on. Okay, so anyway, okay, so, the leading bringing communism to Rhodesia, Mozambique, Angola, and South Africa. 16, to cause a total collapse of the world's economies and engender total political chaos. Right. Black Lives Matter, anyone? Antifa, anyone? 17, well, I will take this. And of course, this is going to date this particular class, but Trump just stated Antifa as a terrorist organization. So, and then I heard, I think it was a day after he announced that, maybe 2 days after, that Antifa put some post up on whatever social media platform is saying that they were going to dismantle all their offices, blah, 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 blah. Well, okay, fine. But all of those communistic filth will just go underground, change their names or do something else or become something else. And they'll just keep hanging around. At least when they were Antifa and they had, Antifa offices, at least we knew where to go find them. So in a sense, I don't know if Trump's just driving them farther underground so that they can't be targeted, right? I don't know. You can look at it both ways, I suppose. But to continue, 17, to take control of all foreign and domestic policies of the United States. 18, to give the fullest support to supranational institutions such as the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, the Bank of International Settlements, BIS, the World Court, and as far as possible, make local institutions of lesser effect by gradually phasing them out or bringing them under the mantle of the United Nations. Right. Which is why the United Nations has to be removed from this country. And I don't give a damn if the Rockefellers were the ones that donated the land to the UN. The filthy thing needs to go bye-bye anyway. 19. Penetrate and subvert all governments and work from within them to destroy the sovereign integrity of nations represented by them. Yes, particularly nations that, like we the people are the sovereignty of the nation. That's the one that they really want to get rid of. 20. Organize a worldwide terrorist apparatus and negotiate with terrorists whenever terrorist activities take place. It will be recalled that it was Benito Croce who persuaded the Italian and U.S. governments to negotiate with the Red Brigade's kidnappers of Prime Minister Moro and General Dozier. As an aside, General Dozier is under orders not to talk about what happened to him. Should he break that silence, he will no doubt be made a horrible example of in the manner of which Kissinger dealt with Aldo Moro, Ali Bhutto, and General Zia-ul Haq. Right. So Kissinger whacked all these people, right, for the Committee of 300. 21. Take control of education in America with the intent and purpose of utterly and completely destroying it. That's well underway, obviously. Much of these goals, which I first enumerated in 1969, have since been achieved or are well on their way of being achieved. Right. To go back and just to mention something about the education situation, everybody would be well to go and learn who writes all of the books for all of the classes for all of the schools. Go learn who the publisher is, and then go learn who owns that publisher. And you'll find out that they're all a bunch of Zionists, right? So literally, Israel has been writing your children's school books for 50 years. Might want to wake up to that. And you might want to take your children out of school, homeschool them, or get together with 12 other people, parents, and, well, I don't know, hire your own teacher. And I don't know, if one of you's got a house big enough, or just set up a tent in the backyard, have the teacher teach the children there. There's plenty of technology to be able to teach them anything. And guess what? You guys trust that teacher. Guess what? Every day can be a field trip day. Imagine that, right? You can actually really learn something. But to continue, of special interest in the Committee of 300 program is the core of their economic policy, which is largely based on the teachings of Malthus. Yes, good old Malthus musings. The son of an English country parson who was pushed to prominence in the British East India Company, upon which the Committee of 300 is modeled. It's funny he took this amount of time to actually state that fact. I'm going to reread that because that's really important. So Malthus, the son of an England country parson who was pushed to prominence in the British East India Company, upon which the Committee of 300 is modeled. So what did they do? They just kept moving the British East India Company along, and they're like, well, let's reorganize it and call it something else. Okay. Makes sense to me. Malthus maintained that man's progress is tied to the Earth's natural ability to support a given number of people, beyond which point Earth's limited resources would rapidly be depleted. Once these natural resources have been consumed, it would be impossible to replace them. Hence, Malthus observed, it's necessary to limit populations within the boundaries of decreasing natural resources. It goes without saying that the elite will not allow themselves to be threatened by a burgeoning population of useless eaters. Hence, culling must be practiced. Again, who's the enemy? Mankind. So again, culling useless eaters, hence culling must be practiced. As I have previously stated, culling, quote unquote, is going on today using the methods maintained in the Global 2000 report. All economic plans of the committee meet at the crossroads of Malthus and Friedrich von Hayek, another doom and gloom economist who is sponsored by the Club of Rome. The Austrian-born von Hayek has long been under the control of David Rockefeller, and von Hayek theories are fairly widely accepted in the United States. According to von Hayek, the United States economic platform must be based on A, urban black markets, B, small Hong Kong type industries utilizing sweatshop labor, C, the tourist trade, D, free enterprise zones where speculators can operate unhindered and where the drug trade can flourish, E, end of all industrial activity, and F, close down all nuclear energy plants. Well, I think a lot of that is kind of being reversed at the moment because they're starting to fire nuclear plants back up. I think Paul might have mentioned, or Spectre, you guys might have mentioned in Roundtable on Wednesday that they're actually talking about firing up 3 Mile Island again. And I've heard other tales of other power plants, nuclear power plants, possibly doing the same thing. So I think this is getting reversed to some extent. To continue, von Hayek's ideas dovetail perfectly with those of the Club of Rome, which is perhaps why he is so well promoted in right-wing circles in this country. The mantle of von Hayek is being passed to a new, younger economist, Jeffrey Sachs, who was sent to Poland to take up where von Hayek left off. It will be recalled that the Club of Rome organized the Polish economic crisis, which led to political destabilization of the country. Well, I think the Polish have pretty much reversed that shit. They are, at the moment, one of the most pro-nationalist nations, I would say, in the world, aside from Iceland, Sweden, Norway, and Denmark, probably. Poland's probably right up there at the top. And it doesn't look like there's going to be anything that's going to alter their trajectory. So I think the globalists kind of lost with that one. This exact same economic planning, if one dare call it that, will be forced upon Russia. But if widespread oppression is encountered, the old price support system will quickly be restored. Well, we saw how that's gone, and now, the Ukraine war that Russia's most likely going to win without question. So that kind of went bad for the globalists as well. The Committee of 300 ordered the Club of Rome to use Polish nationalism as a tool to destroy the Catholic Church and pave the way for Russian troops to reoccupy the country. Obviously, that never happened. The Solidarity movement was a creation of the Committee of 300 Zbigniew Brzezinski, who chose the name for the, quote, trade union and selected its office holders and organizers. Solidarity is no, quote unquote, labor movement, although Gdansk shipyard workers were used to launch it, but rather it was a high-profile political organization created to bring forced change in preparation for the advent of the one world government. Most of Solidarity's leaders were descendants of Bolshevik Jews, of course. This helps to understand the saturation coverage provided by the American news media. Professor Sachs has taken the process a step further, ensuring economic slavery for a Poland recently freed from the domination of the USSR. Well, that did happen. Poland will now become the economic slave of the United States. Nope, I don't think that ever got finalized. Poland, I think it's on its own volition at the moment, very much so. All that has happened is that the master has changed. Well, sorry, Brzezinski, it didn't work out that way. So Brzezinski is the author of a book that should have been read by every American interested in the future of this country, entitled The Technotronic Era. It was commissioned by the Club of Rome. The book is an open announcement of the manner and methods to be used to control the United States in the future. It also gave notice of cloning and robotoids, i.e. people who acted like people and who seemed to be people but were not. I think the current term that everybody has adopted for that is NPCs. I think that's what you call that now. Brzezinski, speaking for the Committee of 300, said the United States was moving, quote, into an era unlike any of its predecessors. We were moving towards a technotronic era that could easily become a dictatorship. I reported fully on the technotronic era in 1981 and mentioned it in my newsletters a number of times. Well, this is, again, exactly what we covered in the Modern Slave article that we just got done reading. So if you want to know more about that, as far as what Brzezinski was getting into, that playlist of the Modern Slave is probably the best current updated thing as to 2025, as to where we're at. And there's a lot of good things in that article about where it's going as well. And then if you want to keep up with where it's going, again, as I said in the reading of that article, make sure that you guys take a look at Catherine Austin Fitt's work from time to time at the Solari Report. She's very good at keeping everybody up to date as to what these bastards are doing. So to continue, Brzezinski went on to say that our society, quote, is now in a information revolution based on amusement, focus, spectator spectacles, saturation coverage by television of sporting events, which provide an opiate for an increasingly purposeless mass, close quote. Well, that would have been true in the early 90s. But it wouldn't have been true in the late 90s, however, because by that time, people had started to get on the internet. They started to actually use it for research purposes, exchanging information, creating real news organizations, meaning things that actually report on the news. And not to say that there isn't a bunch of people, mindless NPCs that still go worship at the altar of foosball, but it didn't work out in the totality of what they wanted it to be. Let's just put it that way. Okay. So was Brzezinski another seer and a prophet? Could he see into the future? The answer is no. What he wrote in his book was simply copied from the Committee of 300's blueprint given to the Club of Rome for execution. Isn't it true that by 1991, we already have a purposeless mass of citizens? Well, there's still NPCs out there, but I think the turn of the tide, if you will, for those that choose to be more educated. In my personal opinion, I feel has been growing. And from what I'm seeing from the generations that are younger than I am, because I'm Generation X, is that those that are taking it upon themselves to become autodidactic, let's put it that way, are doing so with much greater fervor and purpose than I've ever seen before, for the exception of possibly those of us in Generation X that did the same thing when the internet first came out. It feels like that sort of rejuvenation of autodidactic, true agrarian anarchy coming back to roost in the hearts of a lot of people. And hopefully that continues. And of course, that's part and parcel of why I created the Vocational Science of Freedom, is to have a place where all of us can share information, keep all of us and each other up to date, and teach everything that we find and have learned to each other to become as free as we possibly can, as is stated in the VSOF mission statement. I'd be good if we could see many more young people joining the VSOF. I think everybody can learn from everybody else. And I think because of our organization, the way that we go about learning, the way that we go about adhering to the trivium and the quadrivium as we learn, and the way that we go about sharing our information and having open roundtables and discussing everything, putting everything into categories and making sure that we put everything down in a way that's logical for those that come after us to learn it. I think that's what matters, because as a wise man once said, the very purpose of life is to pass on what you've learned. It's to make sure that those that come after you are educated, that they have the capacity, that the secrets of the world, if you will, are not lost forever. So that's the direction that we should be heading. Continue to perpetuate what the VSOF stands for. And to make sure that you guys also share the links from time to time. Now, if you find somebody that they're slightly awake, they kind of know that something's wrong, but they don't quite know what it is, well, then make sure that you give them your favorite VSOF class to say, hey, well, if you want more information, maybe you want to check this out. And then you can show it to them, and particularly young people, and say, you might really want to know the totality of what's going on. Now, if they're the kind of person that hasn't fully come of age yet, let's put it that way, you might not want to hit them with something like this. You might want to hit them with something easier, like just give them the trivium classes, teach them how to learn, and get them into something that's going to be interactive, that they know that they can bring their friends along with them. Because I think one of the things that this Club of Rome and the Committee of 300 definitely has accomplished, and that is to isolate everyone, to keep everyone isolated, and to never have people develop their social abilities, right? So everybody's on their phone constantly and constantly looking down at their phone, and they're not interacting with other human beings. And that, if done too much and too often, makes one feel very disconnected from their society, from their fellow man. And so they don't have an outlet to talk about whatever it is they feel like they want to talk about, which is part and parcel of the exact reason why we have the Wednesday night roundtable, so that it's open to everybody that can come on and be a part of the VSOF, and that there's no holds barred on Wednesday. So if you guys want to join the VSOF and get on the mega server, please do so, because that's where you can talk about anything you want to. Total free speech, because we're on mega. And the VSOF Wednesday night roundtables are only for people that have been vetted. So no one's going to listen to anything that we talk about on a Wednesday night roundtable at the Vocational Science of Freedom, for the exception of the people that have been vetted to be there, right? Which is why I ask people some very simple questions before they join the VSOF. It's all free. You just have to tell me a little bit about yourself, just so I'm sure you're not a psychopath and that you're not a member of one of these filthy ass groups, right, that are trying to kill everybody. So, to continue, isn't it true that by 1991 we already had a purposeless mass of citizens? We could say that 30 million unemployed and 4 million homeless people are a purposeless mass, or at least the nucleus of one. In addition to religion, the opiate of the masses, which Lenin and Marx acknowledged was needed, we now have the opiates of mass spectator sport, unbridled sexual lusts, rock music, and a whole new generation of drug addicts. Mindless sex and epidemic of drug use was created to distract people from what is happening all around them. In the technotronic era, Brzezinski talks about the masses as if people are some inanimate object, which is possibly how we are viewed by the Committee of 300. Of course, that's exactly how we're viewed by any of these Talmudic filth. You're all cattle. That's all you are. He continually refers to the necessity of controlling us, quote unquote, masses. At one point, he lets the cat out of the bag. Quote, at the same time, the capacity to assert social and political control over the individual will vastly increase. It will soon be possible to assert almost continuous control over every citizen and to maintain up-to-date files containing even the most personal details about health and personal behavior of every citizen in addition to the more customary data. These files will be subject to instantaneous retrieval by the authorities. Right? It's cops looking over at their computers and being able to know what your blood type is, that kind of shit, right? We already have this. And every single time that you're wearing a smartwatch or that you even own a smartphone at all, they're constantly tracking you, which is why I don't own one. But anyway, to continue with Brzezinski's musings here. Power will gravitate into the hands of those who control information. Our existing institutions will be supplanted by pre-crisis management institutions, the task of which will be to identify in advance likely social crisis and to develop programs to cope with them. Right. That's literally precog shit. That's your, I'll know what you're doing before you're going to do it, and I'll stop you before you do it. I can't remember what the movie was with Tom Cruise that had that as the plot line. But anyway, you get the point. So they're going to literally say, okay, we know what he's going to do, or he's starting to get a little bit snarky here, sounds like, with his texts and his tweets and his emails and stuff. And we're going to have to put a stop to him. We're going to have to go arrest him because of his wrong think, which is literally what they're doing right now in England. Minority Report, thank you. Which is why I hope England goes full-on shenanigans and literally has a full-on civil war. And I hope eradicates the entire nobility. And as far as I'm concerned, they can take all of Parliament with them, particularly the House of Lords. That country needs to literally and figuratively get a grip. And I think they should do a clean slate restart. But anyway, England is not our problem. So, all right, to continue. Okay, back to Brzezinski's musings here. This describes the structure of FEMA, which came much later. It will encourage tendencies through the next several decades toward a technotronic era, a dictatorship, leaving even less room for political procedures as we know them. Finally, looking ahead to the end of the century, the possibility of biochemical mind control and genetic tinkering with man, including beings which will function like men and reason like them as well, could give rise to some difficult questions. Yeah, chips in your brain, anyone? And I don't know, everybody constantly running to AI to ask the most basic of questions that you could simply put into a simple prompt to just ask the internet, or I don't know, maybe read a book about it. Brzezinski was not writing as a private citizen, but as Carter's national security advisor and a leading member of the Club of Rome and a member of the Committee of 300, a member of the CFR, and a member of the old Polish Black Nobility. His book explains how America must leave its industrial base behind and enter into what he called, quote, a distinct new historical era. Quote, what makes America unique is its willingness to experience the future, be it pop art or LSD. Today, America is the creative society. The others, consciously or unconsciously, are emulative. What he should have said was that America is the proving ground for the Committee of 300 policies, which led directly to a dissolution of the old world order and an entry into the New World Government, New World Order. That I can definitely see. I can see a lot of things happening here in America that are, let's try it here first sort of shit. But of course, the try it here first is always going to be dependent upon the type of country that it is. Third world countries are obviously not going to be going through the tryings of certain things that they'll try here, because obviously there's simply different demographics. There's different reasons to attack different countries for different reasons. So to continue. One of the chapters in the Technotronic era explains how new technology will bring in its wake intense confrontation that will strain social and international peace. Oddly enough, we are already under intense strains through surveillance. Lords in Cuba is one place where this is happening. Another is NATO headquarters in Brussels, Belgium, where a giant computer designated 666 can store data of every type mentioned by Brzezinski. Well, this is really the Utah NSA servers in this country, and will soon to be all of the AI data centers. So this is going to be something that's just going to spread across the entire world unless we do something about it. Or unless you just don't give them any of your data. Let's start with the individual first, right? Yeah. Plus possessing an expanded capacity to take in data for several billions more people than presently exist. If it ever comes to that, but which, in the light of the Global 2000 Genocide Report, will probably never need to be utilized. Yeah. I think they'll just do it because they want to. The retrieval of data will be simple in the United States, where the Social Security and or driver's license numbers could simply be added to the 666 to provide the surveillance recording announced by Brzezinski and his committee of 300 colleagues. Right. Again, they're pushing right now in 2025 for the digital ID. Never, ever take one. I don't care if they say they'll fine you $1,000 if you don't have one. I don't care if the next time you go to get your filthy ass driver's license, they say you have to have a real ID or we can't give you one. Okay, fuck you. I'm not taking one. And I'm going to continue to travel on the roads and highways. And if you stop me, it's war. And yes, I would say that directly to a DMV fuckery idiot. But the thing you should really do, lawfully, is just surrender the damn thing anyway. Get your vocational science freedom status docs done, correct your status, and then get rid of the damn thing. You surrender the license and then tell everybody in notices, hey, I've surrendered this thing. I'm going to continue to travel now. Anybody got a problem with that? Right? That's called due process, people. All right, to continue. The committee already in 1981 warned governments, including the government of the USSR, that there, quote, will be chaos unless the Committee of 300 takes complete control of preparedness for the New World Order. Control will be exercised through our committee and through global planning and crisis management. Shut up, Jew. I reported this factual information a few months after I received it in 1981. Another item I reported back then was that Russia had been invited to join the preparedness for the coming one world government. Well, I guess they're obviously not doing that any longer because Putin's not having fuck all of it. When I wrote these things in 1981, the Conspiracy's global plan was already in advanced state of preparedness. Looking back over the past 10 years, it can be seen just how rapidly the committee's plans have advanced. Well, yeah, right. They've got some of it done. They didn't get some other of it done, but it's still trotting along because we're throwing some sand into the gears. But it would be much better if we started pulling the gears out. Okay. If the information provided in 1981 was alarming, then it should be even more alarming today, as we near the final stages of the demise of the United States as we know it. With unlimited funding, with several hundred think tanks, and 5,000 social engineers, the media, banking, and control of most governments, a reality, we can see that we are tracing a problem of immense proportions, one that cannot be supposed by any nation at this time. That should be, that's why I wrote that. Okay, that's why I read that incorrectly. Because it should be, cannot be opposed, not he. All right, that makes sense now. As I have so often stated, we have misled into believing that the problem I'm talking about has its origin in Moscow. True. Okay, this is something that they're constantly throwing in your face, right? Oh, it's Russian coercion. It's Russian coercion. What are these morons constantly harping about? They're a stupid fucking parrot because the Committee of 300 is saying, oh, you should tell everybody that the origin of the problems is Moscow. Well, nobody's believing you anymore, you morons. It's so much in your face, you almost can't see it. Literally. That's how bad it is. Anyway, to continue. We've been brainwashed into believing that communism is the greatest danger we Americans are facing. Well, yes, in our own country, but it's not really communism is a standpoint of what they're doing. What the communists are is the problem. The global, Luciferian, dark occultist, Atonists, Luciferians, Canaanites, cult of Rome, Saturnalian cult, all of these things. Khazarian mob, all of it. They're all the same fucking people, okay? Now, you could just be cliche and you say, oh, it's the Jews. Well, not only is that a modern term, it doesn't come close to describing what they are, how far they go back, and what they've been doing, okay? Because their evil and their continued oppression of all mankind predates any of the words that people associate with them now, like the term Jew or even the term Canaanite. Okay? Goes back long before that. In fact, I don't know a time in history where it's not laid down in either in myth or in actual reality, meaning beware of these people, like, say, in Egyptian busts, literally, that we haven't been warned about what's going on, okay? So, yeah. Just know how far this goes back, okay? And don't fall into current zeitgeist or current vernacular. Like, expand your mind and realize what the totality of this is, okay? That's all I'm getting at, right? Okay, to continue. This is simply not so. The greatest danger arises from the masses of traitors in our own midst. Our Constitution warns us to be watchful of the enemy within our own gates. These enemies are the servants of the Committee of 300 who occupy high positions within our governmental structure. They occupy high positions within a Roman city-state called the District of Columbia, which was created in 1871 after these Luciferian filth broke the country apart in the Civil War, and then did more so with the Reconstruction Acts, and then created this thing in 1871, which now we all bowed down to through contracts, trusts, pledges, bonds, and oaths that nobody's aware of. So just to get some clarity there. The all capital United States is where we must begin our fight to turn back the tide threatening to engulf us. That I will agree with. And where we must meet and defeat these internal conspirators. True. The Club of Rome also had a direct hand in creating the 25-year-old war in El Salvador as an integral part of the wider plan drawn upon by Elliot Abrams of the U.S. State Department. It was Committee of 300 member Willy Brandt, leader of the Socialist International and a former Chancellor of West Germany, who paid for the quote-unquote final offensive by the Salvadorian guerrillas, which fortunately was not successful. El Salvador was chosen by the committee to turn Central America into a zone for a new 30-year war, which task was associated to Kissinger to carry out under the insidious title of the Andes Plan. Just to demonstrate how the conspirators operate across all national boundaries, the final offensive action planned by Willy Brandt came about as a result of a visit to Felipe Gonzalez, who at the time was preparing himself for his Club of Rome-oriented role as Spain's future prime minister. Apart from myself and one or two other of my intelligence colleagues, the former colleagues, no one had appeared to have heard of Gonzalez before he surfaced in Cuba. Gonzalez was the Club of Rome's case officer for El Salvador and the first socialist to be elevated to political power in Spain since the death of General Franco. Gonzalez was on his way to Washington to attend the Club of Rome's socialist, quote-unquote, Get Reagan meeting, which took place in December 1980. President at that Gonzalez-Castro meeting was the left-wing guerrilla Guillermo Ungo? Don't know. Run by the Institute for Policy Studies, the committee's 300 most notorious Washington-based left-wing think tank. UNGO was run by an IPS fellow who died in a mysterious plane crash while en route to Washington to Havana to visit Castro. Funny how people die in small aircrafts all the time, right? Maybe a good idea, I don't know, not to get on them. As most of us know, both the left and the right of the political spectrum is controlled by the same people. Yes. Global Luciferian occultists. Which will help to explain the fact that UNGO was a lifelong friend of the late Napoleon Durante. Durante? Anyway, I have trouble with these foreign names. Leader of the right wing in El Salvador. It was after the Cuban meeting that the final offensive by the Salvadorian guerrillas was carried out. The polarizing of South America and the U.S. was a special assignment given to Kissinger by the Committee of 300. The Maldivians War, also known as the Falklands War, and the subsequent overthrow of the Argentinian government, followed by economic chaos and political upheavals, were planned by Kissinger associates, acting in concert with Lord Carrington, a top-ranking member of the Committee of 300, one of the principal Committee of 300 assets in the U.S. The Aspen Institute of Colorado also helped plan events in Argentina, as it did in the case of the fall of the Shah of Iran, which we spoke of earlier. Latin America is important to the United States, not only because we have so many mutual defense treaties with countries there, but also because it has the potential of providing a huge market for American exports of technology. Well, okay, there's a contradiction. How are you going to export American technology when you want to destroy American technology and industrialization? Huh? But anyway, I think it's much more the other direction, that South America has a tremendous amount of resources, which the Cult of Rome and the Committee of 300 want to be able to control by using America's military power to basically, and the CIA, to determine who they want to rule down there. I think that's more along the lines of what they want to do. Heavy industrial equipment, which world have galvanized many of our faulting companies and provided thousands of new jobs. This was to be prevented at all costs, even if it meant 30 years of war. Instead of seeing this huge potential in a positive light, the Committee of 300 saw it as a dangerous threat to its post-industrial zero-growth U.S. plans and immediately acted to make an example of Argentina as a warning to other Latin American nations to forget any ideas they may have had to promote nationalism, independence, and sovereign integrity. Right. This is the reason why so many Latin American countries turned to drugs as their sole means of support. Well, again, that's a double-edged sword from a standpoint that Dope Incorporated was the one that was making sure that they were coming into the country. Iran-Contra, anyone? Right? And all of the drugs that were being literally airdropped into Arkansas when Bill Clinton was, governor there, right? But to continue. Americans in general look down on Mexico, which is precisely the attitude with which the committee wants the people of the United States to regard Mexico. Well, okay, fine, but there's a bit more of a history there, like particularly between Mexico and Texas, that I think is not going away anytime soon. But anyway, what we need to do is change our thinking about Mexico and South America in general. Mexico represents a potentially huge market for all types of U.S. goods, which could mean thousands of jobs for America and Mexicans alike. Well, that pretty much went the opposite direction with, what was it? Was it GATT? No. Anyway, whatever the hell the trade agreement was with Mexico, where all of the jobs went there instead, and the only thing that we got was a bunch of criminal immigrants, basically. Oh, NAFTA. Thank you, Spectre. Transforming our industries south of the border and paying the mascadillos slave wages is not the interest of either country. It benefits nobody but the Olympians, right? Mexico received most of its nuclear power technology from Argentina, but the Malvinas War put an end to that. The Club of Rome decreed back in 1986 that it would stop exports of nuclear technology to developing countries, with nuclear power stations generating abundant, cheap electricity. Mexico would have become the Germany of Latin America. Such a state of affairs would have been a disaster for the conspirators, who have, by 1991, stopped all exports of nuclear technology except that destined for Israel. There's your real problem right there. By the way, side note, Kennedy also wanted to make absolute sure that the Israelis did not get a fucking nuclear program. Probably another reason why I got whacked. Okay. Since we're on 2 hours, I think I'll pause here. Might be a slight odd place to stop and start to come back to. But anyway, we'll just continue the reading when we come back here. I don't want to go too much longer tonight. My voice is starting to get a little bit harsh. So with that, this will be the second reading. It didn't look like we got down too much farther. We're only about, this looks like, oh God, maybe 1/6 into the length of this article. Anyway, I don't know how many more times I'll read this. Maybe I'll do it next week. Maybe I won't. Not promising anything. But as all of you can tell, the reading of this would not take any of you all that long if I don't continue with this next week. But it does connect with a lot of the things that we talk about here. And it does teach everyone the much larger picture of what is going on in the world, who your enemy is, and the little organizations that works to come against you. Okay? So I hope all of you enjoyed this reading of Conspirator's Hierarchy, the story of the Committee of 300. So I will see all of the VSOF members who wish to join in on the Wednesday night roundtables on Wednesday this coming. Hope all of you have a wonderful rest of your weekend. And until next time, stay safe and stay sovereign.